In 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
Warning. The material discussed in this show may be sensitive or a trigger for some listeners. Strong language and topics are discussed. We talk with active duty service members and practice OPSEC at all times. You have been warned.
The Bipolar DM, Jason Cottam. His show talks about Dungeons and Dragons, indie writing, and living with a mental illness, in particular bipolar disorder, borderline disorder, and major depression, among other diagnoses. Check us out right here on Saturdays, 7 p.m. Eastern, also on WLFE-DB.com, and wherever else you listen to podcasts. So take a seat, sit back, and get ready for the Bipolar DM.
Welcome to the Bipolar DM show. I am your host, Jason, the Bipolar DM. This is a show about Dungeons and Dragons, indie writing, and living with a mental illness. In my case in particular, I have bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, and major depression, among other diagnoses. If you'd like to reach us, you can contact me by email at thebipolardm@gmail.com. or go to my webpage, www.thebipolardm.com. There you'll find more information about the show, links to our other live shows that we have, as well as resources on indie writing, mental health, and Dungeons and Dragons, and my podcast, and just all kinds of good stuff on there. So be sure to check out my webpage, thebipolardm.com. You can watch us live on twitch.tv/thebipolardm, as well as on YouTube and Facebook. And we air live on 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Saturdays. And you can find us also on WLFE-DB.com. That is our radio station that we are broadcasting out of as well. We are proud supporters of Safe Space. If you're not familiar with what Safe Space is, it is a program in which we are since we're virtual, we're a virtual safe space for people that are in crisis and not necessarily have to be in crisis, but just people that have some rough stuff going on in their life. Now, we're not doctors, we're not psychiatrists or any of that stuff, so we're not here to solve your problems, but we have resources. And if you go to WLFE-DB.com, click on the Safe Space button, you can get connected to several resources in the community and nationwide that can help you out. We have a Patreon. If you're interested in supporting us, if you like what we're doing and some of the other spin-offs that we have done, such as Bipolar Dragons, consider becoming a Patreon supporter. Go to patreon.com/bipolardm, and there you can select several different ways that you can support us with all kinds of goodies ranging from buttons and stickers up to t-shirts and hoodies. And so be sure to check that out. Patreon.com/bipolardm. Well, on today's show, I'm very excited who I have on. Her name is Kay, and she has a very rare diagnosis that a lot of people have heard of, but have a lot of misconceptions about. And we'll have her introduce what her diagnosis is and who she is right now.
Hi.
Hello, how are you doing?
Great, how are you?
I'm doing outstanding. So let's go ahead and talk first a little bit about who you are, what your background is, like professionally, what do you do, and who you are.
My name is Kay Pilon. I am an author and artist. I am from Canada, and I spend a lot of time doing creative work, and I have a very extensive history in experiencing mental health treatment, and the entire broad spectrum that entails.
Okay, and what are you diagnosed with?
I am diagnosed with my main diagnosis is dissociative identity disorder,
Which is more commonly known as
multiple personality disorder.
right, which is not a very well looked upon term, I would say.
It's a fairly inaccurate
Yeah.
diagnosis, or not diagnosis, claim at this point. There's been a lot of research since the multiple personality disorder term was coined.
Right. And for some people who may remember this is a movie from years ago called Sybil, starring Sally Field, in which she portrayed a woman who claimed to have several personalities, and from there it kind of got very sensationalized, as this really rare but I don't even know how you would describe it. Fascinating, morbid fascination with this diagnosis, and so then you have a lot of several celebrities even claiming to have it. And so let's first talk about what this thing is not. What is dissociative identity disorder? What is it not? When people people think about it.
It is not an well. One of the most inaccurate portrayals is a more modern, recent thing would be Split, the movie with, yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It is a farly inaccurate portrayal. It is not a disorder that means violence, aggression, or anything of that sort. Most people with dissociative identity disorder are actually more susceptible to trauma and violence themselves in experiencing it rather than protruding it.
Yes, and I think also a lot of the research indicates that this is actually a coping mechanism in response to experienced trauma.
Yes, dissociative identity disorder specifically it's a form of post-traumatic stress disorder, specifically complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And it is, unfortunately, there is a modern day discussion about having dissociative identity disorder without trauma. But unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but in the truth state, it's not correct. Dissociative identity disorder comes solely from experiencing constant neglect, trauma, abuse, and all those in your childhood, early childhood stages.
Which is when you're most developing as a person, is when this, I guess for lack of a better word, fracture kind of happens. And so what is it then that you have?
So dissociative, I'm just going to say DID, it's a little easier.
Yeah.
DID is when you were a child, around certain ages, it's very discussed, it's very debated. But generally before the age of 9, you start to form a singular personality that has your traits. But when you are experiencing consistent trauma, now some people can go through the same amount of trauma and not develop DID. It depends on genetics, coping mechanisms, and so many different aspects.
Right.
The child's brain will then start to dissociate. It's kind of like a creative mechanism where you split into different parts, where certain parts can cope with what is happening to you, and other parts become, well, blissfully unaware.
Okay.
So
more like an extreme form of compartmentalization to the nth degree.
Dissociation is very it's not uncommon. Like, everyone experiences it. When you're driving somewhere and you just forget that you've driven, that's a form of dissociation. In certain, and say borderline personality disorder, some people will say they've done something and they have no recollection of it. Dissociation is also very common in traumatic-based disorders, but with DID specifically, as well as other specified dissociative disorder, which is not a more, how do I put this? It's another form of DID, but it's less distinguished.
Okay.
people with that diagnosis as well experience dissociation on an incredible scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've had those apps. I call them going on autopilot, where I'm supposed to be going one way, I go a totally different direction, and don't even realize it until I'm a couple miles down the road, and stuff like that. And but how does this, but to imagine it on such a bigger scale, this is just a momentary lapse, but to have it on a scale where we're talking about not just a few minutes, but hours or longer. How long does a typical episode last when this happens?
It's very variable depending on the person, but in my experience, an episode can be 10 minutes or it can be 6 months to a year. It varies significantly depending on the circumstances, the experiences, and the person struggling with this disorder themselves. So, for example, back in 2020, I experienced a significant event which led to a split. So I ended up losing around 2 years of time because I was not the one who portrayed who I am. Every memory is very, very distant and confusing. So it's kind of like a revolving door sometimes. Yeah.
So then I guess would lead to a very common question you probably get a lot, and that is, do you have distinct personalities? Separate?
Yes. The part of dissociative identity disorder is that you have to have a minimum of 2 alternating personality states which have different features. So, for example, and those can be very minor. One personality state can like broccoli while the other doesn't. It's variable, but in most cases there are more than 2, and those variations can be quite significant. So, for example, with my system, as it's called, one of my girls really likes cats, whereas another can't stand them. So I have 2 cats. So sometimes that's fantastic, and other times it's a frustration.
Wow. And then how do you? Well, I guess the first question I would have to ask is, how do you cope with having such huge memory gaps? I mean, just waking up one day or coming out of an episode, and then all of a sudden you're like, where the fuck am I? How did I end up here? And what's this thing called a pandemic, or some shit like that happening? How do you cope with that?
Well, as I said, that would be variable between different people, but for me personally, I have experienced, this disorder begins in childhood, so I have experienced memory gaps like that for years. So I have developed, in my experience, a very severe form of apathy where I just kind of go through the motions. Oh, I don't remember this. Okay, let's keep going. Oh, I don't remember this. Oh, let's keep going. Oh, this happened and I have no idea, and that's big and world changing. Okay, let's just deal with that later.
Yeah.
You just keep going because there's no other choice.
Yeah, I could totally see that. Wow. And then, in addition to that, how does that affect your life? I mean,
it's very disruptive.
Keeping a job and relationships and stuff like that. How does that affect that?
In my experience, it's very disruptive. I previously had a position at a thrift store, and it was wonderful. But unfortunately, I would have days where I would completely forget that I even was part of a job, that I had a job, or I would forget that I had a shift booked, or I would forget what I was supposed to do, and my boss would tell me what I'm supposed to do, and 5 minutes later, I'd have no idea what I was doing or where I was. So it can be very disruptive. In my relationships, I have been very lucky to have family members and friends who have been very supportive, but it has led to some rifts and some, I don't like the term, but it's led to some dramatic explosions in not remembering certain important things, or, understanding boundaries is another one, where a boundary for me that I can remember is one thing, but my friends might have boundaries that I can remember, but if another part comes out, they might not be aware of that same boundary, and they can cross it, and that can shatter a relationship.
Right. Right. And now what do you know of your other personalities? I mean, as far as, and how do you go about knowing? Because, you have this memory gap, but do you just be kind of like a sleuth and detect, what they're about, or does this come about through therapy?
Definitely in therapy, it has been beneficial. For me specifically, I am very lucky to have a very close friend who helps document certain aspects of things, who discusses, hey, you were talking and you were talking in a different tone, or you were talking in a different manner, or you said things that you would normally say. And so we kind of put together different pieces trying to figure out what's what. So for me, I'll just give names. There's me, Kalela, and I kind of float through dealing with whatever. And then, for example, we have Catalyst. Catalyst, also known as Cat, is a part that holds a lot of anger. So for her favorite thing is loud, hardcore music that just shakes you to your core, with black clothing and darkness, and she's the one who doesn't like cats, which I find ironic considering her nickname is Cat. But it's just there's others like Jessica. Jessica was the first one we realized existed. And she is like the main protector. She kind of makes sure things flow as smoothly as possible. She tries to intercept when things start to go too far. But unfortunately, we did have an experience with a therapist who claimed that dissociative identity disorder, which is unfortunately, this is very common, did not exist. And that and she was quite rude about it. So unfortunately, that led to Jessica being very disoriented, confused, angry, and we lost track of her for a long time. And it's only within the new therapist, within recent months, that she's been able to feel safe enough to be like, hey, I'm still here.
So these are, so how do you view them? Do you view, I guess it seems more like you view them more like sisters almost. I mean, how do you view your other personalities?
So everybody with DID, experiences it differently. So some people might consider them parts, some people might consider them aspects, facets, whichever. For me, I kind of assume a role of assuming they're sisters, that we kind of consider ourselves a family. Okay. Because that's the way we managed to cope when we were children, going through what we went through. Yeah. Just a family of supportive connections.
So in addition to what sounds like you have an incredible support network going on, and in addition to that, what other adjustments to your life do you have to make to accommodate for this illness?
Significant. I'm still very early on in the stages of understanding this diagnosis myself. I was only diagnosed a year ago, and since then I am incredibly lucky that CMHA, here 24/7 and all that, they provide the funding for me to see a specialist who focuses on DID. So my biggest thing is always making sure I know when those appointments are, because those are vital and important, and never missing them. We've been lucky enough to organize a supportive network with the local hospital, where if things start to become a little too unraveled, it's too uncopable, we have that. But when it comes to my personal life, I've kept a very minimal circle, because it's just too much to have too many people remember everybody's everything and try to pass it on from person to person.
Right. Okay. You did mention something that is very important I'd like to talk about too, is having a safety plan. Yes. Which is, you're familiar with that. Anybody that's been in or out of the doors of those white halls are familiar with what a safety plan is. And for those of you who are not, it's basically, if this happens, I need to do this, such as if I'm starting to have signs and symptoms of my illness, then I need to go to the emergency room, or I need to contact my doctor, or checklist of things that you need to do. And then in addition to that, things that you can do to help minimize a trigger, such as for some people, going someplace public, getting outside, getting away from being trapped indoors, or the opposite, going someplace secluded and away from all that. And so a safety plan, and it's usually about on one sheet of paper, is extremely important to have, especially if you suffer from any kind of mental illness that's unfortunate for a lot of us with mental illness, can lead to self-harm. You were correct in mentioning that, there is a very small percentage of those of us with a mental illness that are violent, and that's a very small percentage. The vast majority of us are victims ourselves. And a lot of times that is what has led into our mental illness for many people, is that victimization. And so, it's very important to remember when you're dealing with those of us with this that, first of all, we're people. That's why when I introduced Kalela, I wanted to talk about first who she was as a person. Before we talked about the diagnosis, because, part of the show is education. I think education comes through knowledge. And having somebody who I consider a subject matter expert on DID, having experiencing it, and is humble enough to admit that you don't know all the answers yet, but you're getting there. And so I applaud you for, keeping up the good fight.
Thank you.
So,
I feel that the best thing is education. Education is a vital aspect of so many things, and if I can participate in educating, then that's the best I can think of.
Now, what are some of have you done anything else as far as for like advocacy and the like, and getting involved in that realm? Have you done anything like that?
I previously did peer support work with a charity based in New York. It's called The Haven. It's mostly a Discord web server, and it is full of phenomenal members, phenomenal people from all walks of life, and such kindness radiates from it. And I sometimes, when I feel I am capable, will provide peer support to members I've been through the therapy ring many times, right? So I can offer my perspective and help teach, coping skills, and be there if somebody just needs somebody to sit with you. So I try to do peer support work like that. The Haven is a big benefit to my life personally. It has been wonderful, and I've met some amazing people there. So that's my main focus. But I also try to advocate with my writing and my art. I use that as an avenue for exploring the topic of mental health and illness.
Which is a perfect segue into your writing. Let's go ahead and talk about that. You are, as you said, an author. You said 2 books, is that correct?
I have 2 books currently published on Amazon. And then in 2022, I have 2 more coming out. One of them in February, and one of them in, I believe, June is the guesstimate area.
Okay. All right. So let's first focus on the 2 that you got now. What are those 2 about?
So the first one is The Prophet's Daughter. I wrote it when I was 14, so, it's a 14-year-old book.
That. Yeah.
I published it when I was 15. It got picked up at 16 and was published again. Unfortunately, things with that publisher kind of went awry, so we ended up publishing it again. But it talks about the very serious. This book came about during the time when Canada, specifically, was going through the legalization of LGBTQ marriage. So it talks about, segregation, racism, stuff like that, while also just having those elements of, intense personal development and learning about your past and stuff like that. Whereas my next book, the one that came out after, it didn't come out until 2019 when I was 20. I've written other books since then, but this was the only one I felt was publishable. It's called When I Am Someone Else, and that is a poetry collection focused on mental illness, specifically the sides of addiction and grief. Unfortunately, I lost a very dear friend when I was young, and that fed into a lot of the experiences I went through. And I harnessed that pain and used that to write this book. It's available on Amazon, and it's received some pretty good reviews, and that makes me happy because I'm glad that people were able to relate to it.
Yeah, well, we'll have to get the. Do you have an address to where to get it to? To link to that, or is there a search?
I can send you one. Yeah. If you just look up "When I Am Someone Else" on Amazon, you're good to go. It'll be right there.
All right. Let me just. There we go. There. And then we'll see about getting a link up for that. So anybody's interested in your work, it sounds amazing. Some amazing work, especially I know when I was your age, I was trying to write, and I just couldn't get over that hump to become a published author. But I was a writer back then too, and but to accomplish something like that though at such a young age is great, and then to have another piece of work to compare your styles to and how you've grown as a person in a decade's time is amazing to look at. Be very interesting to see more about that. Now, what about what you got going on in the future as far as the two works that you got coming up?
So in February of 2022, I'm so excited for this. My poetry collection, it's currently sitting at about 130 poems, will be published by Tamarind Hill Press, which is a publisher based in UK. Okay. And it is very focused on the more morbid topics that come with mental health. So self-harm and suicide are very prominent topics. But it's not graphic. It just describes the emotion, the feeling, these things that people don't generally talk about when you think of those experiences. It's very personal. I find it interesting to share that the entire collection was written while I was in a psychiatric unit.
Amazing. Okay, we're going to go ahead and go to a quick commercial break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more on the topic of writing and how you went about the actual process of getting your books published. And so let's go ahead and here we go. Welcome back, and thank you so much for joining us today as we are having this great discussion with Kalela. Pronounce your name right, correct?
Yes, you did.
Okay. I'm always self-conscious when I'm pronouncing people's names. But we had a really great discussion about dissociative
Dissociative
identity
identity disorder.
disorder, or DID, which was more commonly known as multiple personality disorder, which is a very gross oversimplification at best, to refer to it as that. But we talked about that. We talked about her some of the work that she's done as far as her writing goes. And I wanted to talk a little bit about more of the mechanics behind getting these books published. And there's two basic routes to getting a book published. You got your traditional route, which you go through a publishing house and they take care of most if not all the expenses, or you do it yourself in indie publishing or self-publishing. And you've actually experienced both sides of that. So let's go ahead and start with your first book. How did you go about with that? Did you do a traditional or indie publishing?
So with The Prophet's Daughter, I wrote it, loved it, and then I self-published it myself. I did the original book design I did myself, but I was lucky enough to have some contact with somebody who offered to do a complete cover design as a part of their portfolio. So they did the entire cover design for me free of charge, and I was very grateful. His name is Matt Banstra, and he did an amazing job. And then, so I went through CreateSpace at the time, which is now merged with KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing. They published it, distributed it. I did a book signing, but the biggest thing was I was 14, okay? So, I published it, but I hadn't at the first point gone through editing. I was just so excited. I was like, I wrote a book, let's go through that. Yeah. And then, but later on, around 15 and a half, about 16 years old, it got picked up by Love and Lifestyle Publishing, which is a self-publishing company here in Toronto. And they took it, edited it, and then put it through the channels, and back and forth reviews. When you're 14, you don't rate the best, but it worked. But with When I Am Someone Else, now that I did all on my own, and it turned out I've received some rave reviews. I've had people tell me that it's made them cry, and people are telling me all the time that they're super excited for the next follow-up book, and because When I Am Someone Else is the precursor to Scarlet Clock. But publishing When I Am Someone Else, I was lucky enough. I was actually browsing through Instagram one day, and I saw this photographer, and I loved his work. It was just that macabre. It was just beautiful. And so I reached out to him. I was like, hey, would you mind if I used X photo for my book cover? And he was like, yeah, go ahead, just make sure you mention me. So he let me use it, and I think personally that it very much fits the tone of the book. And I was lucky enough to have that experience. And so I did the editing and designed the cover, and there we went. It's an easy process in some ways, but when you write a long novel, you definitely need to focus on the editing, the proofreading, it can be quite a process. It's not easy said and done.
Yeah.
But everybody thinks it is.
Yeah, and it's one of those few expenses in self-publishing that I say is worth putting a little money into, which is the editing process. Because that's just the one thing as many times as I do a proofread, I'll still go to print and I'll be like, oh my God, I can't believe I misspelled that, or I used the wrong version of this, or whatnot. And so, but the editing process is one of those things that's generally taken up and done in-house by the publishing companies. And so, which is kind of nice to have that taken off of your plate. But as far as a creator goes, what was your experience? Being working with a publishing house versus doing it all on your own.
So with the self-publishing, it was a lot more personal. But with the publishing house, it's a lot of back and forth and discussion and hearing different terms, different words, different everything. Just
Jargon.
waiting. Yeah. Yeah, just waiting for the next step, the next step, the next step. Right now we begin editing in about a week or two. And I'm not too miffed on how it's going to go with Scarlet Clock, because Scarlet Clock itself is poetry. So there's going to be poems we cut out, poems we continue with, poems we cut. But with The Buried King, which is the next novel I'm releasing, like the actual fantasy novel, that one I can imagine is going to be quite difficult, because you have to cut out so much, you have to edit so much, you have to remove this and remove that, and it's my passion project, right? So it's going to be, when I worked with the editor for The Prophet's Daughter, here's a funny story, actually. I wrote this story with no intention of having any romance involved, and the editor was adamant that I had the two main characters end up in a romance, and I was like, nope. So we ended up settling on, at the end of the book, the very last scene, they hold hands, and that's it.
Okay.
So it can be very, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, when you clash with somebody on an opinion? Yeah.
But hey, even at that age, you held your ground, which was pretty impressive too, against a publishing house and an adult at that. So that's pretty cool. I like that. Now with the how about some of the perks of working with the publishing house? What's some of the perks you get?
I can kind of just sit back and let them do the work, and then just kind of put my input in. They do the distributing, so I don't have to worry about reaching out to publishing houses or bookstores or everything like that. I don't have to worry about that, because they've got it all in their pocket. I don't have to worry, because I know some of my books will be in libraries, and I don't have to be the one to organize that. I know that they will do the advertising and all those things that I had to do myself, that I had to pay for, that I now don't have to. And it's a lot easier, I will admit, but it is not easy. Getting a publisher is impossible. I'm very lucky and very grateful that my publisher has taken a chance on me, because it's taken years to find one who is willing to be like, hey, I'll take a chance on you.
Yeah, and did you go through using an agent to find this publisher, or
I
did
did
they
not.
find you through, or they find you through your work?
I actually submitted to them. I was looking, so I went to Google and I was looking through publishers, and I found one, Tamarind Hill Press, and they were actually open to submissions, unsolicited submissions, which are submissions without a publisher or agent, sorry. And I was like, oh, cool, I'll submit it. And I wasn't really expecting anything. I'd submitted to places before and never heard back, or, heard rejection after rejection. And I was like, okay. Kind of like how Harry Potter got rejected 12 times. I felt that.
Yeah.
I feel that in my bones.
Yeah.
But then I heard back. I was actually in the hospital when I got the email. I was on my phone, because we had a period of time where we were allowed our phones. And I get this email, and I looked at it, and I just started crying. And I ran to one of the other patients, and I was like, I'm getting published. This is amazing. And the nurse was like, are you okay? And I'm just sobbing. It was so funny. But it was definitely a process, and I wouldn't go with another publisher, to be honest, because they've been wonderful and they've been very patient and understanding. So
Yeah, that's probably the biggest thing that's a difficult commodity to find, is somebody that is patient, especially when you don't know what the next day or even sometimes the next hour might bring you and take you. So congratulations on that. That's so great. And so Let's see. Well, let's talk. Actually, now that we talked about the perks of traditional publishing, what are some of the perks of the indie industry?
Oh, well, there's definitely many. You have a lot more control. You
Mm-hmm.
have a lot more understanding of what you're doing, what you can do, how to do it. It's all in your court. Like it's a ball completely in your court. You know, you have a stadium to yourself. Whereas with publishing through a traditional publisher, you kind of like it's still pretty freeing, but you're, in my perspective, you're kind of pigeonholed to, I have to do this. And I don't know if that's personally because of my perspective or
Mm-hmm.
my opinion, but I know that with the self-publishing, I've heard it's very different, where you put your work out, you do the work, you build your audience, you do all this stuff yourself. And that's amazing, and it definitely
Yeah.
shows diligence and prowess. But
Yeah.
with publishing traditionally, there's a safety net, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Because you know that your book now has somebody who's speaking love into it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very, I guess the biggest benefit to self-publishing is the freedom. You
Mm-hmm.
can just do it yourself and you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, I know. I published my two books while I was manic, and from first draft to published work was 30 days on on each one of those. But I do want to talk a little bit about your work doing fantasy novels. Now, there has been a lot of studies on the therapeutic benefits of writing, even creative writing. Let's talk about your first. You got other fantasy novel, correct?
So the fantasy novel I have now that's coming out
Mm.
in mid 2022 is my first technical fantasy novel, but
Okay.
I've done a lot of fantasy writing when I was like a youth. And
Mm-hmm.
then my first book was a post-apocalyptic.
Okay. And how is that? How did that help you? Psychologically. With getting
Oh.
writing.
Writing for me is like breathing. There's no other way to put it. When I was young, I started writing and it just gave me a sense of freedom, a sense of creativity,
Mm-hmm.
a place to go where I felt safe.
Yeah.
I developed who I was, what I loved. I learned so much in developing my own style and my own writing, and it's been an incredible journey. Um, Personally, I can't imagine not writing.
Mm-hmm.
It's so important to me, and I think creativity is a big factor in recovery and resilience, and because
Mm-hmm.
you need to learn, like creativity can be so many things, but creativity also comes in those small forms of, I'm gonna make this tea, but I'm gonna make it a little different today. Like
Yeah.
creativity is so varied, but
I guess that's why art therapy is such a big part of being in the psych ward is
yes.
how doing those arts and crafts, other than just to keep us busy. Um, yeah, I have personally benefited a lot from art therapy. I love art. I love writing. I've been a writer since I was a kid, and I know exactly what you're talking about. Having dozens and dozens of novels written, but none of them will ever see the light of day. Be like the lost. Will be one of
They
those
just
things where
sit
they
there.
open up the hard drive after I die, and see all the crap work I got.
I can't
But
tell you how many poems I have just sitting there that are like half finished. It's like
mm-hmm.
just a wounded animal sitting there like I'm here, I'm still here, and it's like, yeah, I know. I've
That'd be
tried.
an interesting work, just a collection of half poems.
Yeah,
Three or
that'd be
four
cool.
lines, and just that'd be a very interesting work right there. Kind of makes somebody have to fill in the blank. So
I
that'd be
always
pretty.
loved those books. You know, I think they were like Goosebumps that
Matt.
did the Follow Your Own Adventure.
Oh yeah, they did that. Dungeons and Dragons, of course, had their series of those too. Um, Gosh, I can't remember what the name of it was. It was, and then it had the brand Choose Your Own Adventure, which was very popular as well. But I was thinking about writing one of those, but the mechanics of how to write it is really mind-boggling, because you're thinking if they go 3 different directions, and then that 3 different directions will turn into 9 different scenes, and then next thing you know, you got 27 different chapters you're writing, and it's just wow, it's just crazy how much work will go into those books, and so it's always understandable why they're so too short. I've not seen a very long one, although I know they do write them. It's just it just takes a lot of work to do.
The amount of brain power.
Mm-hmm.
I could not. I really couldn't.
I mean, the closest I get to that is with dungeon mastering, where I have to kind of anticipate where the players might go. I mean, they're in a sandbox. They can virtually go anywhere they want to, or go nowhere whatsoever at all. And so then I have to kind of throw little baits out here and there, saying, well, try and come over this way and do this adventure, or try and do that one, and what they choose, and then the route they decide to take, and the people they interact with or don't interact with. It's a lot of planning. But it's a lot of fun, though, too. It's helped me a lot with my creative writing, especially with world building and character development, like for the non-player characters that I control, which is basically the entire planet. But you haven't played Dungeons and Dragons, though. But you know a bit about it.
I've done writing and role playing and stuff like that, and creative writing. Unfortunately, I never really had a friend group that did Dungeons and Dragons, but I've heard some really cool stories about it. It looks really fun.
It is. It's a great game. I think the biggest thing about it is the camaraderie you get from it, the personal connection. I think that's what has really made Dungeons and Dragons stand, for close to coming up to 50 years now, being around. But the people that you meet are incredible. The table's so accepting to all kinds of diversity. That's one thing they really pride themselves on, is the diversity at the table. So you can have the jock at the same table as the cheerleader, as the geek, as the same as LGBTQT plus, and everybody in between, and from all walks of life, and it's been great seeing how things have turned around for the game, especially as it's been portrayed in recent years versus like when I grew up under the Satanic Panic, which was it was the devil and demons were being summoned, and people were kids were killing other children, and rituals to get more experience points, and just bullshit stuff like that. And but now it's being used in therapy, and play therapy especially. But they're finding actually it's working out even with adults. I got a couple groups together that I call Dungeons and Dog Tags, where we have veterans, and so a lot of these guys, we got PTSD and all kinds of other stuff going on, and but also we have a special bond, with all of us being former military and stuff like that, and some active duty. We have one woman who's playing while she's in Iwakuni, Japan, stationed out there. So so it's like 9 o'clock in the morning for her, when 9 o'clock the next day in the morning when we're playing at 6 o'clock at night. So it's pretty cool. But I would say we'll have to get you in a game sometime and just have you give it a try out. The great thing about technology and the internet now is that people are discovering how easy it is to play it on the internet. I mean, yes, you always want it in person. It's always not always better, but it is usually better in person. But you do still get a lot of that same stuff, that personal interaction with other people. But the scheduling is so much easier to do, especially when you don't have to worry about getting dressed below the waist. You just have to worry about your hair and just what they're going to see on the camera. You don't have to worry about commute times or parking or any of that stuff. But it's a fantastic game. I did want to ask. I guess I'm circling back to your fiction work.
Mhm.
How did what is on your first work? I don't know how much you want to give out about it, but what is it basically about, and who is your main character?
The Prophet's Daughter? Oh, it's
Yes.
follows Erin, Arin, Lovelock, and again, 14.
Mm-hmm.
And she is the embodiment of who I was as at that point in my life.
Okay.
Um, she goes through, you know, trust, betrayal, and all these things. But the biggest thing for her is understanding who she is.
Mm-hmm.
And I had one scene that I had to write that I could not write. It
Mm-hmm.
took me 2 weeks of crying to write that scene. But
Oh wow.
Erin is, yeah, it was a difficult scene because I knew it had to happen. It was further development, but I didn't want to. But it had to happen. But the character herself is very much an embodiment of who I was at that point in my life. And, as chaotic as being a 14-year-old can be, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the story itself was very personal. I actually wrote it based on the inspiration I learned from what was the class called? Psychology, anthropology, and sociology class. We were
Hmm.
discussing, you're going to have to forgive me, Georgetown? That,
Jonestown.
yes, that.
Yeah.
We were discussing that in class, and that inspired the entire book,
Wow.
all from one
Now,
class.
you're the next fiction work you have coming out. What is that character about, and how much whatever you want to reveal about that one? I'm going to loop these together. You'll see in a second.
I'm so excited to talk about this one. The Buried King is the next one, and the main character is named Elika, Elika.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes through, the main portion of the story is surviving trauma and betrayal and pain. And it it even touches on some more serious topics, but I'll leave that for surprise.
Mm-hmm.
And the book is about understanding emotions and needing connection and going through the motions of understanding who she is and what she's been through.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, but understanding the antagonist's point of view and what he's been through and how painful it's been for him and going from there.
Now, here's where I'm going to link them together. Character development. How does your 14-year-old writer self develop the character versus your now, I'm not going to ask how old you are,
24.
self, yeah, would has developed that main character? The kind of like the differences and some of the similarities.
They're both
As you grow as an
headstrong.
author. Yeah.
They're both headstrong. I will say that. But there's more confidence in Elika than there was in Erin.
Mm-hmm.
There's more, I would say, personality. There's more strength. There's more understanding. And there's a
Mm-hmm.
whole new world of empowerment. I mean,
Excellent. Yeah.
Elika would very much be like a grown-up version of Erin just in a different world.
Yeah. So, how did you? I mean, how much of yourself did you put into the second character? You did say you put a bit of yourself in the first one. How much of yourself did you put in this newer one?
I think what I did with Elika would be I wanted to write about who I'd like to be. Somebody who is,
Hmm.
capable and headstrong and somebody who's confident and, she's not perfect. She has her faults. She has her pain and her trauma and her sadness, but she carries it better. She carries it with strength.
More like a more mature person.
Yes.
That's pretty cool. All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on here with us and discussing with some people can be a very sensitive topic, but I'm glad that you're very open about, which is, mental illness and mental health. And if you were to be able to talk to somebody out there right now and give them a word of advice, especially when they're dealing with a crisis or they just don't know what's going on, how what we all go through in the beginning when we don't have a diagnosis yet and we know something's wrong, but we're scared and confused. What kind of advice would you give that person?
My biggest thing is, treat yourself with kindness, and I know that I never saw this. I always believed it was wrong, and when people told me I was against it, with time, it does get easier. I'm not going to say it gets better, because, some things just don't get better. But it becomes easier, and you become stronger, and you need to treat yourself with delicacy and care. Yeah. You are just as deserving of kindness and appreciation as anybody else.
Great piece of advice right there. All right, I'm going to put you in the back real quick and then tie this up, and then we'll have a few words afterwards. So thank you so much. And all right. Oh, well, that was such a great show. I really enjoyed this topic. It was an amazing to meet Kay and talk about this. You can watch us live on Saturdays, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on WLFE-DB.com. And you can also find us on Strim TV on the Variety Unlimited channel. Listen to this show anytime wherever you find your favorite podcasts. We're all on the major ones, whether it's Apple, Spotify, or all the other major outlets. We subscribe to them all. And we'll get this up and running as soon as we can. Again, if you want to contact us, if you have a comment or topic suggestion, or if you'd like to be a guest, you can email me at thebipolardm@gmail.com. Also visit my webpage, thebipolardm.com, and there you'll find contact information as well as sorry, I got distracted. Contact information as well as resources and my links to my live shows and my blog, which I do still have occasionally going. We have a Facebook fan page too, so if you go to Facebook and do the search for Bipolar DM, that'll get you to our Facebook page. That's a little bit more up to date than the web page sometimes, just because it's easier to post things that are articles, videos, stuff like that. So be sure to check that out. And we'll be working on next week's show coming up. Hopefully we'll be able to get a gentleman in here. We were planning on have this last week, but was not able to. He's a hypnotherapist, and we'll love to be discussing what he does and how he's able to help people with mental illness and other issues. Thank you again for tuning in to the Bipolar DM show, and remember, everybody out there, take your meds.
Thank you for listening to the Bipolar DM. They love sharing thoughts and ideas. See you next week. 7 p.m. Saturdays on WLFE-DB.com, where our shows are your shows, and that makes for great talk radio. WLFE Digital Broadcast Network is on TV. You can watch all of our shows on WLFE-DB.com. Check out our channels. Paranormal View for all of your paranormal type shows. LGBTQ Friends for all of our LGBTQ shows. Variety Unlimited for all other shows. It runs 24/7 right on WLFE-DB.com. You'll even catch the lives, all in one place. Never miss an episode, past or future. WLFE-DB.com, where our shows are your shows.